it's things like Russian debt was previously untouchable a few years ago. People searching for owners of dollar-denominated bonds issued by the energy giant Gazprom, for example, which are in demand from Middle Eastern family offices, or other people looking for a way to get into the ruble play that previously clearly has been very difficult because the Russian market's been so sanctioned. Russian bonds are particularly in demand, and the demand has been so high that it's pushed down yields something like 5 percentage points in February alone. So there seems to be a great deal of interest from clients. Money managers are reporting approaches from Wall Street sales teams looking to, as I say, make bets on the ruble through something called non-deliverable forwards, which are derivatives that don't involve a physical Russian asset or an individual person who might be subject to sanctions. And there's a good reason for that. The currency's up 13% against the dollar this year alone. So there's a lot of interest in these deeply discounted securities. And the bet is, as you've said, that sanctions may be lifted if a peace deal is reached, and the discounts on these securities will evaporate.
What is the likelihood of, Russia being invited back into the fold? That does seem like it is a priority for the Trump administration.
Yes, it is. We learn practically every day different aspects of the way Russia and the US seem to be interested in working together on anything from Arctic exploration to developing new trade routes, to a story we've just moved today, in fact, that the US and Gazprom may be exploring ways to work together, which would certainly be a striking departure from past policy. So there seems a great appetite in this Trump administration to find ways to work with Russia. And one of the reasons for that is because they're very keen, in a kind of geopolitical sense, to draw Russia away from China, to sort of reduce its dependence, which has only grown during this war, on China's economy and on China's diplomatic support, as a way to bolster U.S. policy in regard to China itself.
I mean, that sounds like Angela Merkel's plan, which didn't seem to work out very well for Germany, did it, Tony?
Yeah, that's right. And one has to remember that Russia and China have really been deepening their ties in the last 3 years. Russia's become very dependent on China for economic support to help weaken Western sanctions, and for political and diplomatic backup in places like the United Nations. And these are two neighboring countries. They're big, interested countries in each other's well-being. So it's not clear that the US, whatever it offers, could actually separate them.
I guess the thing that kind of always sits out there for me is that you've got to make sure that Vladimir Putin at some point doesn't say, go back for war. Like, we haven't even gotten, Russia-Ukraine resolved at this point. And
wait, you don't trust him? You don't think he's trustworthy?
The devil's in the details, right? And so how do we get, what kind of guarantees? I mean, and could you even trust a guarantee from President Putin that I'm never going to kind of look to expand my territory again? He's done it twice already, right?
Yes. I mean, this is the giant geopolitical gamble that lays behind this interest from traders, right? It's the assumption that the Trump administration can succeed in producing a deal that ends the war between Russia and Ukraine, and then that deal sticks, right? And that sanctions are lifted and people can go back to making money and doing business. But the real risk there clearly is that a deal that gets done isn't stable. It might break down within a matter of weeks or months. Sanctions might be restored, war might resume, and then traders and investors find themselves in a very difficult position of having committed to Russia and finding themselves stuck in a country that's back at war.
Trust but verify. For those people of a certain age, that was a Russian proverb made popular by Ronald Reagan. In terms of Europe's concerns, Tony, are there any being voiced? I mean, as the Trump administration moves ever closer to the Kremlin, are you hearing concerns from Downing Street? Are you hearing concerns from Berlin? Are you hearing concerns from Paris?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it's fair to say that Europe's been deeply shaken by this rapprochement between the US and Russia and where it may go. They very much lined up behind Ukraine in this war as the victim of this war. After all, it was Russia that started it and invaded. And what they see is a coming together of Trump and Putin to sort of produce and promote their joint interests. And that's leaving Europe on the sidelines to watch all this. And they're afraid that in any peace deal that may emerge, they may be left with the bill in terms of peacekeeping, in terms of monitoring, and they worry greatly that if it all breaks down, they may be left as the ones to try and piece it back together again. So there's a great deal of concern, I think, in Europe that the two sides, Trump and Putin, are talking to each other, leaving Europe and in some ways leaving Ukraine on the sidelines. And they're trying very hard to get in on that conversation and to influence it.
But I'm just wondering then, do we see any really big name investors trying to get in on this trade? Or do they,
the emerging market investors who I feel like you go back 20, 30 years. I was thinking about Jim Rogers, the biker investor who like rode around in the commodity. I mean, we just constantly.
And he had also some, sketchy collections at his house. Are there any,
saying,
family names, household names, Tony, that are willing to make this bet? Or is it only, the Jim Beelan, Rogers, and then emerging markets investors of the world?
Is it still an emerging market, really, right, with a lot of risk?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've learned from sources as part of this big take that companies like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase are among banks that have been acting as brokers to facilitate some of this growing investor demand. So, these are enormous names in the world of finance. So it's clearly the case that there's a growing interest in Russia. And there's one simple reason. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of potential trade and investment at stake here, right? And if they can get back into the Russian market and it proves a bet that's sustainable, then people see an opportunity to make a lot of money, regardless of whether they take a position on the war itself.